the Pythagorean theorem. After watching this video, I will be able to apply the Pythagorean theorem. So first we need to understand what the Pythagorean theorem is. So this is only going to apply to right triangles. And in previous lessons, we discussed how right triangles were really important. And they're kind of fundamental to a lot of things in life. So a right triangle has two important parts to it. The two sides that actually create the angle, that is the right angle, are known as legs. That other side that is away from the right angle or to its opposite side is known as the hypotenuse. The Pythagorean theorem is telling you that if you take two legs and you basically square the measurements and add them, it has to equal the same length as the hypotenuse. So you should definitely write down the theorem or the formula, which is leg squared plus the other leg squared has to equal hypotenuse squared. And the Pythagorean theorem is so common or useful that there's actually a set of 3 non-zero whole numbers that fit into this category, and it's so common they're known as Pythagorean triples. So for example, 3, 4, 5, if I were to plug this in to my Pythagorean formula, they would actually equal each other. So these are just famous Pythagorean triples that if I see them, I can quickly recognize that they do belong and would apply to the Pythagorean theorem. And you really don't need to memorize them. It just would become useful after seeing so many of them to recognize when something is part of the Pythagorean theorem, and that way you don't actually have to do the work. So let's see how you can apply the Pythagorean theorem. We would use this if we're trying to find the third side of a right triangle. So let's say we have this triangle, and it is a right triangle, so we can apply it here. And we have a missing side. We want to find x. So we're going to plug into our formula. So remember, the formula is leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. So we're going to take the measurements of my legs, and it's really important that you identify the legs correctly. So the legs are the sides that actually create the right angle. So we have x squared. X is coming from the actual side length, and the squared part is the formula. And then we have the other leg, which is the square root of 145. But that leg we also squared. Then hypotenuse, which is 14 squared. And now I'm going to simplify. So a very important fact to note is what happens when you have a square root and a square together. Well, that will cancel each other out. So because I have this square root and this second power, it's going to cancel each other out, and I'm only going to be left with the radicand, what is inside, the 145. And then what is 14 squared? Remember, something squared means 14 times itself. And now I'm just going to simplify. So subtract 145, so x squared is going to equal 196 minus 145 is equal to 51. Another important thing to note is, remember, we're trying to find the value of x, not x squared, so we need to get rid of that second power. The only way to get rid of the second power is to take the square root, because that will cancel each other out, and what you do on one side, you do on the other. So I'm left with x equals the square root of 51. Remember, we want to leave our answers in simplest form. So this is where the previous lesson comes in on simplifying radicals. I will divide 51 by a perfect square to see if I can simplify this. However, as you try and simplify this radical by dividing by perfect squares, you would see that there is no perfect square I can divide by. So this is already the simplest form. So let's look at another example. Remember, you want to identify your parts correctly. So we have our two legs, which are the sides of the triangle that create the right angle. So that means we have 4 squared, 8 squared. And this is going to equal whatever the hypotenuse squared is. And the hypotenuse is that other side opposite of the right angle, which happens to be x. So we have x squared. 4 squared is 16. 8 squared is 64. 16 plus 64 is 80. In order to get rid of that second power, we would have to take the square root of both sides, because a square root and a square cancel each other out. So we're left with x is equal to the square root of 80. Then we would actually see if we can simplify this. Radical. I can say that the square root of 80 is the same thing as square root of 16, square root of 5. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 5 can't be simplified. So x is equal to 4 square root of 5. Now you try. Find the missing side of each triangle. You want to leave your answer in simplest form. Select your response below. So you want to plug into your formula. Leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. So this means I would end up with x squared plus 12 squared equals 16 squared. And then I'm going to just simplify all those numbers that are to a second power. So x squared stays the same. 12 squared is 144. 16 squared is 256. Remember to subtract. You end up with 112. And then we're going to take the square root of both sides to get rid of that power. Square root of 112, but I need to simplify my answer. So that radical can be split up into square root of 16 and square root of 7. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 7, so my correct answer should be D.